The dust kicked up around Caroline Foster's worn boots as she stumbled down the wooden steps of the Last Chance Saloon in Fort Sumner, New Mexico territory, clutching the small carpet bag that held everything she still owned in this world. Behind her, the harsh words of the saloon owner still rang in her ears, and ahead of her stretched a late afternoon in August 1878 that promised nothing but more rejection and despair. She had lost her job serving drinks not because she was bad at it, but because the owner's wife had decided Caroline was too pretty to have around her wandering-eyed husband, and that was the final straw in a series of doors that had slammed shut in her face over the past 3 months. Caroline was 22 years old and had come to Fort Sumner with such high hopes back in the spring. Her aunt had promised her work at the general store, a place to stay, and the possibility of meeting a decent man to marry. Instead, her aunt had died of fever within 2 weeks of Caroline's arrival. The store had been sold to new owners who had no interest in honoring any promises made by a dead woman, and the room Caroline had been staying in was needed for the new owner's family. She had found work at a boarding house doing laundry, but the landlady's son had taken unwanted liberties, and when Caroline had firmly rejected his advances, she had been accused of leading him on and was thrown out without pay. The saloon job had been her last hope, and now that was gone too. She walked along the dusty Main Street, passing the general store, the blacksmith, the livery stable. People she recognized glanced at her and then quickly looked away. Word traveled fast in a small town, and by now everyone knew she had been let go from yet another position. Women pulled their children closer as she passed, as if bad luck were contagious. Men looked at her with either pity or calculation in their eyes, neither of which she wanted. Caroline felt like a ghost drifting through a world where she no longer had any place to belong. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, but Caroline felt none of its warmth. She had exactly $3.40 to her name, which might pay for a room for a few nights if she was lucky and did not eat much. After that, she had no idea what she would do. There were no more jobs in Fort Sumner, not for her. She had asked everywhere. The respectable women of the town had made it clear they wanted nothing to do with a girl with no family, no connections, and apparently no luck. The less respectable establishments had made offers she refused to consider, no matter how desperate she became. She found herself walking toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land, and the Pecos River glinted in the distance. There was a small grove of cottonwood trees near the riverbank, and Caroline thought she might sit there for a while and try to figure out what to do next. Maybe she could travel to another town, though she had barely enough money for that. Maybe she could find work at a ranch, though she knew nothing about cattle or horses beyond the basic care her father had taught her as a child back in Missouri, before he had died and left her mother struggling to raise 3 children alone. Her older brother had gone west looking for gold and never returned. Her younger sister had married at 16 to escape their poverty. Her mother had worked herself to death trying to keep food on the table, dying just 2 years ago and leaving Caroline truly alone in the world. The memories hurt too much, so Caroline pushed them away and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The cottonwood trees were closer now, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. She passed a corral where several horses stood swishing their tails at flies, and beyond that, a small barn and a modest house set back from the main road. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was home and preparing supper. Caroline's stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since the small piece of bread she had managed to save from yesterday, She was so focused on her own misery that she did not notice the man working near the corral until he called out to her. "Excuse me, miss. Are you all right?" Caroline stopped and turned, startled. The man was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore dusty work clothes and a worn hat pushed back on his head, and he was holding a hammer in one hand. He appeared to be repairing a section of the corral fence. His eyes, even from this distance, were remarkably blue and held an expression of genuine concern. "I am fine, thank you," Caroline said automatically, even though it was the furthest thing from the truth. She did not know this man, and experience had taught her to be wary of strangers, especially men. He set down the hammer and took a few steps closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "Forgive me for saying so, but you do not look fine. You look like someone who has had about the worst day imaginable." His voice was kind, with a slight drawl that suggested he was from Texas originally. Caroline felt her eyes prickle with unexpected tears. It was the kindness in his voice that did it. She had been met with so much coldness and rejection lately that simple human decency felt like a shock to her system. She blinked hard, trying to maintain her composure. "I suppose I have had better days," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it is not your concern, sir. I will be on my way." "Where are you headed?" he asked, and there was no nosiness in the question, just genuine interest. Caroline realized she had no answer. She was not headed anywhere. She had nowhere to go. The truth of that hit her with full force, and despite her best efforts, a tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. The man's expression softened further. "My name is Kellen Emerson. I own this property here. It is not much, but it is home. And I could not help but notice you are carrying a bag and walking out of town like someone who either has no place to go or is running from something. Given that Fort Sumner is not exactly a hotbed of excitement, I am guessing it is the former." "Caroline Foster," she said, because her mother had raised her to be polite even in the worst of circumstances. "And you are right. I have nowhere to go. I lost my job today. It was the last one available to me in this town." Kellen studied her for a moment, and Caroline braced herself for whatever would come next. Pity, inappropriate suggestions, dismissal. Instead, he surprised her completely. "I have been looking for someone to help me run this place," he said. "I have more work than I can handle on my own. I raise horses, and I have been trying to expand, but I need help with the house, the cooking, keeping track of the accounts, and managing some of the lighter barn work. The pay is not grand, but it includes room and board and an honest day's wage for an honest day's work. If you are interested, the job is yours." Caroline stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You do not know anything about me. I could be a thief or a liar or completely incompetent." "Could be," Kellen agreed, "but my instinct tells me you are none of those things. You are just someone who has had a run of bad luck and needs a chance. I am a pretty good judge of character, and I am willing to take that chance if you are willing to accept the offer." "Why?" Caroline asked, suspicious despite herself. "What do you want in return?" Kellen's expression remained open and honest. "Just what I said. Help running this place. I promise you will be treated with respect and decency. You will have your own room in the house, proper meals, and wages paid on time. If you are worried about propriety, I should mention that I have a housekeeper who comes 3 times a week, Mrs. Jenkins. She is about 60 years old and has a tongue that could strip paint, but she is a good woman. She can vouch for my character if you need that reassurance." Caroline wanted to believe him so badly it hurt, but she had been disappointed so many times that trust did not come easily anymore. Still, what choice did she have? She could refuse and spend the night under the cottonwood trees with no prospects and diminishing funds, or she could take a chance on this stranger who was offering her exactly what she desperately needed. "The whole town just made it clear they want nothing to do with me," she said quietly. "They think I am bad luck or worse. That does not concern you," Kellen shrugged. "Their loss is my blessing, I would say. Welcome to your new beginning, Miss Foster, if you will have it." The words hit Caroline with unexpected force. A new beginning. Was such a thing even possible? She looked at Kellen Emerson, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that gave her hope for the first time in months. He meant what he said. This was a genuine offer with no hidden strings attached. "I accept," she said, and the relief that washed over her was so powerful she felt her knees go weak. Kellen smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more approachable. "That is wonderful news. Come on, let me show you the house and you can get settled. Supper will be ready soon. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage basic food that will fill your stomach at least." He led her toward the house, which was larger up close than it had appeared from the road. It was a sturdy adobe structure with a wooden porch and real glass windows, a sign of prosperity in this part of the territory. Inside, it was clean but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and there was a fine layer of dust on most surfaces. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large fireplace, a wooden table with 4 chairs, and a cooking stove that looked well used. "Your room is through here," Kellen said, leading her down a short hallway. He opened a door to reveal a small but comfortable bedroom with a real bed, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out toward the cottonwood trees and the river beyond. "It is not fancy, but the mattress is good and the roof does not leak." Caroline set her carpetbag down on the bed, almost afraid to believe this was real. The room was simple, but it was clean and private and hers. After sleeping on a cot in a shared room at the boarding house, and then on a narrow bed in a storage room at the saloon, this felt like luxury. "It is perfect," she said, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Emerson. You have no idea what this means to me." "Kellen, please," he said. "We are going to be working together, so we might as well be on friendly terms, and I think I have some idea what it means. I have been where you are, more or less. Lost and alone and convinced the world had no place for me. Someone gave me a chance once and it changed everything. I am just passing that along." He left her to get settled, and Caroline sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking slightly as the events of the day caught up with her. She had gone from absolute despair to unexpected hope in the span of an hour. It felt almost too good to be true, and part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Kellen to reveal some ulterior motive or for this all to be some kind of cruel joke. But as the days passed, none of that happened. Kellen was exactly what he appeared to be, a hard-working, decent man who kept his word. He woke before dawn every day to tend to the horses, repair fences, break young colts, and handle the 100 other tasks that came with running a horse ranch. Caroline threw herself into her new responsibilities with determination, eager to prove she was worth the chance he had given her. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing away months of accumulated dust and grime. She took over the cooking, which was a relief to both of them because Kellen had been surviving on burned beans and overcooked bacon. She had learned to cook from her mother and discovered she still remembered most of the skills, even though she had not had much chance to use them lately. She made bread and stew and biscuits, fried chicken and roasted vegetables, and even managed to create a passable apple pie from the dried fruit Kellen had stored in the pantry. Mrs. Jenkins arrived on the third day and gave Caroline a thorough once-over with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She was a stout woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and a no-nonsense manner that would have been intimidating if not for the underlying warmth in her gaze. "So you are the girl everyone in town has been talking about," Mrs. Jenkins said bluntly. "The one who has had a run of bad luck." "I suppose I am," Caroline replied, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. She refused to be ashamed of circumstances that were largely beyond her control. "Well, Kellen is a good man, and if he has vouched for you, that is good enough for me," Mrs. Jenkins declared. "But I will be watching to make sure everything stays proper and above board. Not that I think Kellen would do anything inappropriate, but people talk, and a young woman living out here with a single man needs someone looking out for her reputation." "I appreciate that," Caroline said sincerely. She had been worried about the gossip this arrangement might generate, but with Mrs. Jenkins coming regularly, at least there was some semblance of propriety. As the weeks passed, Caroline settled into a comfortable routine. She discovered she had a good head for numbers and took over managing the ranch accounts, which had been in considerable disarray. Kellen was excellent with horses, but less skilled at keeping track of expenses and income. Caroline created a proper ledger system and began tracking everything carefully. And within a month, she had identified several areas where they could save money and increase profits. "You have a real talent for this," Kellen said one evening as they sat at the table after supper, reviewing the books together. "I have been just barely keeping my head above water financially, but with your system, I can actually see where the money is going and plan ahead." "I am glad I can contribute something useful," Caroline said. She still sometimes felt overwhelmed by gratitude that he had given her this opportunity. Every night she went to bed in her comfortable room with a full stomach, and every morning she woke up with purpose and a place to belong. It was more than she had dared to hope for. She also discovered that she enjoyed working with the horses, despite her initial lack of experience. Kellen was patient in teaching her, showing her how to groom them, check their hooves, recognize signs of illness or injury, and even help with basic training. There was one horse in particular, a young chestnut mare with a white blaze, who had been badly treated by her previous owner and was consequently nervous and skittish around people. Caroline felt a kinship with the mare and spent hours working with her, speaking softly and moving slowly, letting the horse learn to trust again. "You have a gift with her," Kellen observed one afternoon, watching Caroline coax the mare to take an apple from her hand. "She would not let anyone near her when I first got her. The man who owned her before used a heavy hand and a harsh bit. I was starting to think she might never settle down. She just needed someone to be patient with her," Caroline said, stroking the mare's soft nose. "She needed to know that not everyone would hurt her." Kellen looked at her thoughtfully. "I think maybe you two understand each other." Caroline met his eyes and saw compassion there, not pity. He understood what she was saying without her having to spell it out. That understanding was becoming typical of Kellen. He was one of the most genuinely kind and perceptive people Caroline had ever met. He never pried into her past, but he listened when she chose to share pieces of it. He treated her as an equal partner in running the ranch, valuing her opinions and ideas. He was unfailingly respectful but also warm and friendly, with a quiet sense of humor that often caught her by surprise and made her laugh. Caroline found herself looking forward to the evenings they spent together after the day's work was done. Sometimes they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sometimes they would review the accounts or discuss plans for the ranch. Sometimes they would just talk about everything and nothing. sharing stories and dreams and observations about life. It was during one of these evening conversations, about 2 months after Caroline had arrived, that she realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with Kellen Emerson. The realization hit her as she watched him laugh at something she had said, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners and his whole face lighting up with genuine amusement. Her heart did a strange little flip in her chest, and suddenly everything clicked into place. The way her pulse quickened when he was near, the way she found excuses to be close to him, the way his smile could brighten her entire day. The way she felt safe and valued and seen in a way she had never experienced before. But along with that realization came fear. What if he did not feel the same way? What if she was just an employee to him, someone he had helped out of kindness but nothing more? She could not bear the thought of ruining the good things she had here by revealing feelings that were not reciprocated. So she tried to hide what she felt, to keep things professional and friendly without crossing any lines. Kellen, meanwhile, was dealing with his own revelation. He had known for weeks that Caroline was special, but he had told himself it was just respect and admiration for how hard she worked and how much she had contributed to making the ranch successful. He had told himself it was just appreciation for her intelligence and competence. He had told himself it was just friendship, but he could not lie to himself anymore. He was completely and thoroughly in love with Caroline Foster. He loved the way she hummed while she worked. He loved her determination and resilience, the way she had taken the worst circumstances and turned them into an opportunity to build something new. He loved her kindness to the animals, especially the way she had transformed the frightened chestnut mare into a trusting companion. He loved her quick mind and dry wit. He loved the way the lamplight caught in her hair during evening conversations. He loved her smile, which had been so rare when she first arrived but now came more easily, lighting up her whole face. But Kellen was terrified of acting on his feelings. Caroline had been through so much, and she was finally finding her footing again. She had stability and security here, and he would not jeopardize that by making unwanted advances. What if she felt obligated to accept because he was her employer? What if she was just grateful to him for helping her and mistook that gratitude for something deeper? What if he was just projecting his own loneliness onto the situation? So both of them continued on, each hiding their true feelings, each convinced the other could not possibly feel the same way. Mrs. Jenkins, however, was not fooled for a moment. She saw the way they looked at each other when they thought the other was not watching. She saw the care they took with each other, the little gestures of affection disguised as simple courtesy. She saw two people clearly in love and too scared or stubborn to do anything about it. "You are both fools," she announced one day when she cornered Caroline in the kitchen while Kellen was out working with the horses. Caroline nearly dropped the dish she was drying. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me. You and Kellen, dancing around each other like nervous colts. Anyone with eyes can see you are in love with him, and he is certainly in love with you. I cannot fathom why neither of you has said anything." Caroline's face flushed bright red. "Mrs. Jenkins, I do not know what you think you see, but do not even try to deny it," the older woman interrupted. "I have been alive too long and seen too much to be fooled by a couple of young people trying to hide their hearts. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Caroline said firmly. "Kellen gave me a job and a home when I had nothing. I will not repay that kindness by making things complicated with inappropriate feelings. He was just being decent, helping someone in need. That does not mean he wants anything more." Mrs. Jenkins shook her head in exasperation. "That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars. He lights up whenever you walk into a room. He has turned down 3 invitations to social events in town because he would rather spend his evenings sitting on the porch talking with you. That is not the behavior of a man who sees you as just an employee. Or maybe he is just a private person who does not enjoy social events, Caroline countered, though her heart was beating faster. Could Mrs. Jenkins be right? Did Kellen really feel something for her? Believe what you want, Mrs. Jenkins said, but you are wasting precious time. Life is short and uncertain, especially out here. When you find something real and good, you should hold on to it with both hands. That conversation haunted Caroline for days. She found herself watching Kellen more carefully, trying to discern if there was any truth to what Mrs. Jenkins had said. And the more she watched, the more she saw little signs that maybe, just maybe, his feelings were not as neutral as she had assumed. The way his hand would linger when he passed her something at the dinner table. The way he always seemed to know when she was tired or worried and would find small ways to lighten her load. The way he had defended her when one of his business associates had made a disparaging comment about hiring a woman with a questionable reputation, firmly stating that Caroline was the best thing that had happened to his ranch, and her reputation was spotless as far as he was concerned. The way he smiled at her, different from how he smiled at anyone else, warmer and softer and more genuine. The turning point came in late October, nearly 3 months after Caroline had arrived. Kellen had to travel to Santa Fe to meet with a horse buyer, a trip that would take several days. He seemed reluctant to leave, checking and rechecking that Caroline would be all right on her own, that she had everything she needed, that she knew how to reach the neighbors if there was an emergency. "I will be fine," Caroline assured him, touched by his concern but also amused. "I am perfectly capable of managing for a few days. Mrs. Jenkins will be here tomorrow, and the horses are all well cared for. You have been planning this trip for weeks. Do not let worry about me interfere with your business." "I know you are capable," Kellen said. "That is not the issue. He stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. "I will miss you, that is all." The simple honesty of those words made Caroline's breath catch. "I will miss you too," she admitted. They stood there for a long moment, something electric hanging in the air between them. Then Kellen cleared his throat, picked up his traveling bag, and headed out to where his horse was waiting. Caroline watched him ride away, her hand lifted in a wave until he disappeared from view. The first day without him was strange. The house felt empty, even though Caroline kept busy with her usual tasks. She cooked meals for herself that felt lonely to eat alone. She worked with the horses, including the chestnut mare, who was now calm enough to saddle and ride around the corral. She updated the accounts and wrote letters to potential buyers about the spring foals. The second day felt longer. Caroline realized how much she had come to depend on Kellen's presence, not because she needed his help with tasks, but simply because she enjoyed having him near. She missed their conversations and his quiet company. The third day brought trouble. Caroline was in the barn in the early afternoon, checking on one of the pregnant mares, when she heard horses approaching. She walked out to see 3 men riding into the yard. She recognized one of them, a rough character named Bill Carson who had a small spread about 10 miles away and a reputation for shady dealings. The other 2 were strangers, both looking dusty and mean-eyed. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Caroline called out, keeping her voice steady even though warning bells were going off in her head. She wished desperately that Kellen were here. "Looking for Emerson," Carson said, not bothering to dismount. "Got business with him. He is away on a trip to Santa Fe. He will be back in a few days. If you would like to leave a message, I can make sure he receives it." Carson exchanged glances with his companions. "You are that girl he hired, the one from town that nobody wanted." Caroline lifted her chin. I am Caroline Foster, Mr. Emerson's business assistant and housekeeper. If you have no message to leave, I will ask you to leave the property." "Business assistant," one of the strangers said with a nasty laugh. "That what they are calling it now?" Caroline felt anger flare alongside the fear. "You need to leave. Now." "We were thinking maybe we would wait for Emerson to get back," Carson said. "Might as well water our horses and rest a spell. You do not mind, do you?" "I do mind. This is private property and you are not welcome here. Leave, or I will ride to the neighbors and fetch help." "Now, that would not be very friendly," Carson said, dismounting. The other two followed suit. "We have had a long ride. Surely you can spare some water and maybe a meal. That is just basic hospitality." Caroline's heart was pounding now. These men meant trouble, she could feel it. She started backing toward the house, calculating whether she could get inside and bar the door before they reached her. Her rifle was inside, hanging over the fireplace. If she could just get to it. "There is water at the pump," she said, still backing away. "Help yourselves and then move on." "What if we want more than water?" one of the strangers said, advancing toward her with a leer that made her stomach turn. Caroline turned and ran for the house. She made it through the door and tried to slam it shut, but Carson was faster than she expected. He shoved the door open, sending Caroline stumbling backward. The three men entered the house, filling it with their menacing presence. "Now, there is no need for this to get unpleasant," Carson said. "We really do have business with Emerson. He has been undercutting my prices, stealing my customers. That is not neighborly. We figure maybe if something happened while he was away, something that damaged his property or reputation, he might decide to move on to some other territory." "You have no right to be here," Caroline said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "Leave now or face the consequences." "What consequences?" Carson laughed. "You are going to stop us. A woman alone with a questionable past, who is going to believe anything you say." He had a point, and they all knew it. Caroline's reputation in Fort Sumner was already damaged. If she accused these men of anything, it would be her word against theirs, and she knew whose side the town would take. But that did not mean she was helpless. Caroline lunged for the fireplace, grabbing the rifle before any of them could react. She spun around, cocking it and aiming it directly at Carson's chest. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I said leave. I will give you to the count of 5. 1." The three men froze, clearly not having expected this. "You are not going to shoot anyone," Carson said, though he sounded less certain now. 2. "I am an excellent shot. My father taught me to hunt from the time I was 8 years old. At this distance I will not miss. 3. "Calm down now," one of the strangers said nervously. "No need for violence. That is what I have been telling you. 4. All right, Carson held up his hands. "We are leaving. No need to get trigger happy. 5. The men hurried toward the door, tripping over themselves in their haste to get out. Caroline followed, keeping the rifle trained on them as they mounted their horses and rode off at a gallop. She stood on the porch, shaking now that the danger was past, watching until they were completely out of sight. Then her knees gave out and she sat down hard on the porch steps, the rifle across her lap, tears of reaction streaming down her face. She had been so scared. If they had not believed she would shoot, if they had rushed her, if any number of things had gone differently, this could have ended very badly. After a few minutes, she pulled herself together. There was no point in falling apart. She was safe, the ranch was safe, and the men were gone. But she needed to tell someone what had happened. She needed help. Caroline saddled the chestnut mare, whose trust she had worked so hard to earn, and rode to the nearest neighbor's ranch, about 3 miles away. The Johnson family listened to her story with growing concern and immediately sent their oldest son into town to alert the sheriff, while Mrs. Johnson insisted Caroline stay with them until Kellen returned. But Caroline refused. "I cannot abandon the ranch. What if they come back? All of Kellen's horses are there, his livelihood. I need to protect it." "Then Samuel will stay with you," Mr. Johnson decided, referring to their son. "He can bunk in the barn and keep watch. You should not be alone after something like that." Samuel Johnson was 19, earnest and respectful, and Caroline was grateful for his presence. He indeed slept in the barn and helped with the heavier chores while Caroline went about her work, still shaken but determined not to let fear control her. Kellen returned 2 days later, his successful business trip forgotten the moment Samuel told him what had happened. He found Caroline in the barn, and the look on his face made her heart clench. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Samuel told me what Carson and those men did. If they hurt you, I swear I will." "I am fine," Caroline interrupted. "They did not hurt me. I handled it." "You held them off with a rifle," Kellen said, and there was a mixture of pride and horror in his voice. "You could have been killed." "I should have been here. I never should have left you alone. You had business to attend to. I am not helpless, Kellen. I can take care of myself." "I know you can," he said. "You have proven that over and over, but that does not mean you should have to. That does not mean I do not want to be here to protect you, to make sure you are safe." There was something in his eyes, some intense emotion that made Caroline's pulse race. Before she could analyze it, before she could think better of it, she closed the distance between them and threw her arms around him. For a moment he stood frozen, and then his arms came around her, holding her tight against his chest. Caroline could hear his heart pounding, could feel the tension in his body slowly releasing as he held her. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Not just of those men, but of what might have happened to the ranch, to everything you have built. I did not want to let you down. Let me down." Kellen pulled back enough to look at her face, though he kept his arms around her. "Caroline, you saved the ranch. You were brave and quick-thinking and absolutely remarkable. I am the one who let you down by not being here when you needed me." "You could not have known," Caroline said. "And I did need you. I missed you terribly. Not just because of the trouble, but because—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were, of how his arms felt around her, of the way he was looking at her. "Because why?" Kellen asked softly. Caroline took a deep breath, thinking of Mrs. Jenkins's words about life being short and uncertain. Thinking about how quickly everything could change. Thinking about how she had faced down 3 dangerous men with a rifle, but was terrified to admit her feelings to this good, kind man who had given her everything. But she was tired of being afraid. "Because I love you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I should not. I know you just hired me and gave me a place to stay, and that does not mean you feel anything more than kindness, but I cannot help it. I love you, Kellen. I love working with you and talking with you and building something together. I love who I am when I am with you. And if that means I have to leave because I have made things uncomfortable, then I understand, but I needed you to know." For a moment that felt like an eternity, Kellen just stared at her. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, the most beautiful smile Caroline had ever seen. "You love me," he said, as if testing the words. "Yes," Caroline whispered, bracing herself for rejection. "Thank God," Kellen said, and then he was kissing her. It was not a tentative or hesitant kiss. It was a kiss full of all the feelings he had been holding back for months, all the longing and desire and love he had been afraid to express. Caroline kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, her heart soaring with joy and relief. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kellen rested his forehead against hers. "I have loved you since about a week after you arrived," he said. "Maybe sooner." I loved watching you transform from someone defeated and lost into someone strong and confident. I loved seeing you find your place here. I loved everything about you, but I was terrified to say anything because I did not want you to feel pressured or obligated. You had just found stability. I did not want to threaten that. You could never threaten it, Caroline said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. You are the stability. You are the home I had been searching for without even knowing it. They kissed again, softer this time, full of promise and tenderness. When they emerged from the barn a while later, hand in hand, Samuel Johnson took one look at their faces and grinned. "About time," he said. "I will go tell my folks they do not need to worry about you anymore, Miss Foster. Looks like you have got all the protection you need." The sheriff did come by the next day to take Caroline's statement about Carson and his companions. To Caroline's surprise, he took the matter seriously, especially when Kellen corroborated her story about Carson's threats and poor reputation. It turned out Carson had been suspected of various crimes for years, and several other ranchers came forward with similar stories of intimidation and threats. Carson and his associates were eventually arrested and sent to trial, where they were convicted and sentenced to prison. But Caroline barely paid attention to all that. She was too busy falling more deeply in love with Kellen and planning their future together. Kellen proposed properly a month later, going down on one knee in front of the fireplace on a cold November evening and offering her a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. "I cannot offer you luxury or an easy life," he said. "What I can offer is my whole heart, my complete devotion, and a partnership where we build something together. Will you marry me, Caroline Foster?" "Yes," Caroline said, not needing to think about it for even a second. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married in early December in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Sumner. Mrs. Jenkins stood up with Caroline, and Mr. Johnson stood with Kellen. Some of the townspeople who had shunned Caroline months earlier came to the wedding, though Caroline barely noticed them. She only had eyes for Kellen, who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Caroline's skill with accounts and planning combined with Kellen's expertise in horse breeding created a successful business. They expanded gradually, buying adjacent land and increasing their herd. The chestnut mare, whom Caroline had named Hope, became one of their best breeding mares, producing strong, intelligent foals that fetched excellent prices. They faced challenges, of course. There were droughts and harsh winters, illnesses among the horses, fluctuating markets, and all the normal struggles of ranch life. But they faced everything together, as true partners. Kellen never made a major decision without consulting Caroline, and she did the same. They argued sometimes, but they always worked through their disagreements with respect and love. Mrs. Jenkins continued to come by regularly, though now more as a friend than an employee. "I told you that you were both fools," she reminded them regularly, but she always said it with affection. In the summer of 1880, Caroline gave birth to their first child, a son they named Henry after Kellen's father. Kellen was so nervous during the labor that the midwife finally threw him out of the room, but he was there moments after Henry was born, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Kellen whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how blessed I am." Caroline, exhausted but happy, smiled up at him. "We are blessed, both of us." Henry was followed by a daughter, Sarah, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The house that had once felt empty and echoing was now full of life and laughter and the chaos of children. Caroline sometimes thought back to that desperate day in August 1878 when she had walked out of Fort Sumner with nothing but a carpetbag and no hope for the future. That lost, rejected girl seemed like a different person now. She had been discarded by everyone, left alone and unwanted. But Kellen had seen her differently. He had given her a chance, welcomed her, and told her that their loss was his blessing. He had offered her a new beginning, and together they had built something beautiful. The children grew up loving the ranch and learning the family business. Henry inherited his father's patience with horses and his mother's head for figures. Sarah was adventurous and fearless, reminding Caroline of herself when she had stood her ground against Carson and his men. Thomas was the peacemaker, gentle and kind-hearted, always trying to smooth over any conflicts. As the children grew older, Caroline and Kellen made sure they understood the importance of kindness and giving people second chances. They told them stories about how their mother had arrived with nothing and how their father had seen potential where others had seen only a person down on their luck. They taught them that everyone deserved dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. The ranch became known not just for its excellent horses, but for being a place that gave people opportunities. Over the years, they hired several young men who had been struggling, giving them jobs and training. Two of them eventually started their own ranches with help and advice from Kellen and Caroline. They also took in a young widow with a baby when the woman's family turned their backs on her, giving her work and a place to stay until she could get back on her feet. Passing it forward, Kellen called it. Someone helped me once when I needed it. Now we help others. Caroline would always remember the stranger who had helped Kellen years before, when he was a young man alone and struggling after his family died of cholera. That kindness had rippled forward, changing not just Kellen's life but hers and the lives of everyone they helped in turn. By 1890, the Emerson Ranch was one of the most successful in the territory. Their horses were known for their quality and temperament, bred with care and trained with patience. Henry was old enough to take on significant responsibilities, and both Sarah and Thomas contributed in their own ways. The ranch employed several people year-round and more during busy seasons, and the Emerson family was well respected throughout the region. But success never changed what mattered most to Caroline and Kellen: each other. They still ended most days sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Kellen still looked at Caroline as if she were the most wonderful thing he had ever seen. Caroline still felt her heart skip when Kellen smiled at her in that special way that was just for her. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Caroline asked one evening as they sat together, their hands intertwined. The children were inside doing their evening chores, and for a moment it was just the two of them, like in the early days. "If I had not been working on that fence the day you walked past," Kellen said, "all the time, it terrifies me to think we might have missed each other." "But we did not," Caroline said. "You saw me when I needed to be seen. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a home and love and a family and a life beyond anything I had dreamed possible." "You gave me all that too," Kellen said. "I was just existing before you came along. You made everything meaningful. You turned my house into a home. You made me happier than I knew I could be." "I love you," Caroline said, the words as true and heartfelt as they had been the first time she said them in the barn all those years ago. "I love you too," Kellen replied, kissing her softly. "My blessing, my beginning, my everything." The years continued to pass, bringing all the joys and sorrows that life holds. They lost Mrs. Jenkins in 1892, mourning her deeply but grateful for the years they had known her. They celebrated as Henry married a smart young woman from Santa Fe and brought her home to the ranch. They watched with pride as Sarah announced she wanted to train horses professionally, something almost unheard of for a woman but perfectly in character for their fierce daughter. They supported Thomas when he decided he wanted to study law instead of ranching, understanding that each child needed to find their own path. By the turn of the century, Caroline and Kellen were grandparents several times over. Henry and his wife had given them 3 grandchildren, and Sarah, who eventually did marry a fellow horse trainer, had 2. Thomas, settled in Albuquerque with his law practice, had 1 daughter who loved visiting the ranch during summers. The house had been expanded multiple times to accommodate the growing family, but the heart of it remained the same. The main room where they all gathered, the fireplace where Kellen had proposed, the porch where Caroline and Kellen had spent countless evenings together. In 1903, on a warm summer evening, Caroline and Kellen sat together on that porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their late 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined, but the love between them had only deepened with time. 25 years, Kellen said, though it was actually longer if you counted from the day they met. Still the best decision I ever made, offering you that job. The best decision I ever made was accepting it, Caroline replied, though I was terrified at the time. I was terrified too, Kellen admitted. Terrified you would say no, terrified I would mess it up somehow, but more terrified of letting you walk away without trying. Inside, they could hear their family. Henry discussing ranch business with his oldest son, Sarah telling an animated story about training a particularly stubborn horse, Thomas reading to the younger grandchildren. The sounds of love and life and family. We built something good, Caroline said softly. We did, Kellen agreed. Together. Always together. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the New Mexico sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson and purple. The land stretched out before them, the land they had worked and loved and passed on to their children. The horses they could see in the pastures were descendants of those early ones, generations of careful breeding and patient training. Tell me the story again, one of the grandchildren called from inside. About how you and Grandma met. Kellen and Caroline exchanged a smile. They had told this story so many times, but it never got old. It was the story of how their family began. Well, Kellen called back. It was August of 1878, one of the hottest days I can remember. I was working on the corral fence when I saw a young woman walking past, carrying everything she owned in a small bag. She looked like the world had given up on her, but I saw something else. I saw strength and courage and potential, so I did the only thing that made sense. I offered her a job. And I thought he was crazy, Caroline added, joining in as she always did, or that there had to be a catch. But there was not. He meant every word. He gave me a chance when no one else would. Their loss was my blessing, Kellen said, the words that had become a family motto. And I welcomed her to her new beginning, the beginning of everything good in my life. The grandchildren sighed happily, having heard the story before but loving it nonetheless. They knew the rest, how their grandparents had fallen in love, how they had built the ranch together, how they had created a family based on love and respect and second chances. As night fell, Caroline and Kellen remained on the porch a while longer, wrapped in blankets against the cooling air, wrapped in each other's love. They had lived a good life, the kind of life that mattered. They had loved deeply and been loved in return. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. But most importantly, they had found each other on a dusty road in Fort Sumner on a hot August day in 1878, when one man had seen potential where everyone else saw only failure, when one woman had been brave enough to accept a second chance, when two lonely souls had found in each other exactly what they needed. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the ranch or the horses or the success, or even the children and grandchildren, precious as they all were. What mattered was the love that had started it all, the love that had sustained them through everything, the love that would endure long after they were both gone, living on in the stories their family told and the values they passed down. Caroline leaned her head on Kellen's shoulder, and he tightened his arm around her. 25 years of marriage, and she still felt the same thrill when he touched her. 25 years, and he still looked at her with the same love and devotion he had shown from the beginning. "Thank you," Caroline whispered. "For what?" Kellen asked. "For seeing me, for giving me a chance, for loving me, for everything." "Thank you," Kellen replied, "for accepting that chance, for building this life with me, for loving me back, for being exactly who you are." They stayed there until the stars came out one by one, filling the vast New Mexico sky with light. Inside, their family laughed and talked and lived, carrying on the legacy of love and second chances that Caroline and Kellen had begun all those years ago. It was a good life, a blessed life. A life that had started with rejection and despair, but had transformed into something beautiful and meaningful. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness, an offer of hope, and the courage to embrace a new beginning. Their story would be told for generations, passed down through the family as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best outcomes, that kindness matters, that love can bloom in unexpected places, and that everyone deserves a second chance. Caroline and Kellen Emerson had found all that and more. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found everything that truly mattered. Their love story, which had begun on a dusty road with 5 simple words, had grown into something vast and enduring, something that would outlast them both and continue to inspire everyone who heard it. The cowboy had seen a woman discarded by everyone and had recognized her true worth. The woman had accepted his offer and found not just a home but a purpose, a partner, and a love that would last a lifetime. Together, they had proven that sometimes all it takes is one person who believes in you, one person willing to give you a chance, one person who sees your potential when everyone else has turned away. Their loss had indeed been his blessing, and her new beginning had become their shared forever.